The massive refugee ship Kalen's Hope floated like a dying whale in the cold darkness of space. Its metal hull was covered in deep cracks that leaked precious air into the empty void. Small emergency patches covered the worst damage, but they couldn't hide the fact that this once proud vessel was barely holding together. On the bridge, Commander Thexara stared out at the stars with hollow eyes. Her tall, thin body swayed slightly as she gripped the command console with all four of her arms. The Veltari were not built like humans. They were taller, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. But right now, that glow was almost gone. Thexara's skin had turned a sickly grey color, and dark veins showed through like a road map of hunger. Behind her, the bridge crew moved slowly, like people walking underwater. Each step took enormous effort. The ship's computer made soft beeping sounds, but even those seemed weaker than before. The main screen showed nothing but empty space in every direction. No planets, no other ships, no hope. "Commander," whispered her second-in-command, Kexmore. His voice was so quiet she almost didn't hear him. "The food, it's completely gone now. The last of the emergency rations were distributed this morning." Thexara closed her eyes. 3 days. It had been 3 days since anyone on the ship had eaten a proper meal. The food synthesizers had broken down weeks ago, and their backup supplies had run out. Now 3,000 Veltari were slowly dying of starvation. She thought about the children in the lower decks. When this nightmare had started, they would cry and ask their parents when they could eat. Now they didn't even have the energy to cry. They just lay in their parents' arms, their small bodies getting thinner each day. The parents would sing old Veltari lullabies, but their voices were getting weaker too. The ship's medical bay was full of people who had collapsed from hunger. Dr. Yelnara, their chief medical officer, had told Thexara the truth 2 days ago. Without food, the weakest would start dying within a week. The children would go first, then the elderly, then everyone else. Thexara remembered their beautiful homeworld, Veltaris. It had 3 purple moons and crystal cities that sparkled in the sunlight. The Veltari had lived there for thousands of years, building a peaceful civilization. They were artists, scientists, and philosophers. They had never hurt anyone. Then the Scourge came. The Scourge were machines, massive black ships that consumed everything in their path. They ate planets, turning them into fuel for their endless hunger. When they arrived at Veltaris, the Veltari had no weapons to fight them. They were not warriors, so they ran. Kalen's Hope had been a colony ship, designed to carry people to new worlds, but instead of carrying hopeful colonists, it became an escape vessel packed with terrified refugees. They had left Veltaris just as the Scourge began, tearing apart their world. For months they had wandered through space looking for somewhere safe to land, but every system they approached was either already destroyed by the Scourge or too dangerous to enter. Their fuel was running low, their systems were failing, and now their food was gone. Thexara looked at the communication panel. She had been avoiding this moment for hours, but she couldn't wait any longer. With trembling hands, she began preparing their final distress signal. Maybe, just maybe, someone would hear them. Maybe someone would care enough to help. But as she looked out at the endless empty darkness of space, she couldn't help but feel that they were truly alone. The universe was so big, and they were so small and forgotten. Still, she had to try. For the children. For her people. For the memory of their lost world. Her finger hovered over the transmission button. Captain Kim Tae-ho was sipping his morning coffee when the universe changed forever. The Earth survey ship Harmony was quietly floating through space, doing the boring work of mapping new star systems. It wasn't glamorous, but someone had to chart the unknown regions of space, so future explorers would know where to go. Tae-ho had been captain of the Harmony for 6 years. He was a calm, steady man in his early 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair at his temples. His crew of 37 had been with him on this mission for 8 long months, and they were all getting homesick. They missed Earth's blue skies, fresh air and real food instead of the recycled meals they'd been eating. The ship's pantry was running low. They had enough supplies to last another month, maybe 6 weeks if they were careful. Every meal was planned down to the last calorie. Cookie, their ship's cook, whose real name was Petty Officer Lee Dong-wook, had been working miracles with their dwindling ingredients, but even he was starting to worry. Lieutenant Park Hee-jin was at her communication station, monitoring the usual space chatter, cargo ships reporting their positions, colonies sending routine updates, the occasional asteroid, mining crew asking for directions. It was all pretty routine until her screen suddenly lit up with something completely different. "Captain," she called out, her voice tight with confusion, "I'm picking up a signal, but it's not from any human ship." Tae-ho set down his coffee mug and walked over to her station. "What kind of signal?" "Unknown origin, sir. The computer is trying to decode it now, but—" She paused, watching her screen as numbers and symbols flashed past. "It's definitely not human language." The bridge crew stopped what they were doing. First contact with alien life was something every space explorer dreamed about, but it was also terrifying. They had protocols for this kind of thing, but protocols felt very different when you were actually facing the unknown. The ship's computer worked for several minutes, running the alien message through every translation program they had. Finally, the speakers crackled to life with a mechanical voice that made everyone's skin crawl. "Emergency, dying, 3,000 souls, no food, please, anyone, help us." The bridge fell completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The message repeated, and each time it played, the desperation in the alien voice became clearer. Even through the computer translation, you could hear the fear and hopelessness. Lieutenant Park looked up at her captain, with tears streaming down her face. Her hands were shaking as she pressed buttons on her console. "Captain," she whispered, "they're dying out there, 3,000 of them. They're starving." Tae-ho felt his heart skip a beat. 3,000 lives, 3,000 beings somewhere, in the darkness of space, slowly dying while they waited for help that might never come. He thought about his own crew, his own family back on Earth. What if it was humans out there sending desperate messages into the void? "How far away are they?" he asked. "Approximately 18 hours at full speed, sir." 18 hours. Tae-ho looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. He saw Navigator Corporal Jung Min-ho, barely 25 years old, staring at the communication panel with wide eyes. He saw Chief Engineer Warrant Officer Choi Eun-soo, a tough woman who rarely showed emotion, wiping away a tear. He thought about their supplies. They had enough food for their own crew for another month, maybe 6 weeks. If they shared it with 3,000 starving aliens, they might not have enough to make it back to Earth themselves. But then he thought about those desperate voices calling out in the darkness. Someone's children were dying out there. Someone's parents, friends, loved ones. There really wasn't a choice to make. "Navigation," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Change course immediately. Communications, send a response telling them help is coming. Engineering, I want maximum speed." "Sir," Jung Min-ho said quietly, "if we use all our fuel getting there, then we'll figure out how to get home later," Tae-ho replied. "Right now, people are dying. We're going to help them." The journey to reach the alien ship felt like the longest 18 hours of Captain Tae-ho's life. Every minute that passed meant more suffering for the 3,000 beings waiting in the darkness. The crew of the Harmony worked frantically to prepare for what would be humanity's first face-to-face meeting with alien life. Dr. Lee Min-woo spent those hours studying the little information they could gather from the distress signals. As the ship's chief medical officer, he knew he might be dealing with completely different biology. What if their food was poison to the aliens? What if touching them could hurt either species? He prepared every medical scanner and analysis tool. They had, knowing that one mistake could turn a rescue mission into a disaster. Meanwhile, Sergeant Choi Jae-sung gathered the crew's emergency rations. Every human on A. The ship volunteered to give up their personal food supplies without being asked. Cookie Lee Dong-wook worked with the ship's computer to figure out how to modify their food so alien digestive systems might be able to handle it. When they finally spotted the alien vessel, the entire crew gasped. The ship was massive, easily 10 times larger than the Harmony, but it looked like it was falling apart. Huge cracks ran along its hull, and pieces of metal drifted around it like a cloud of debris. Emergency lights flickered weakly through broken windows. It was clear this once beautiful ship had been through hell. "My God," whispered navigator Yong Min-ho. "How are they even alive in there?" Docking the two ships together was incredibly dangerous. The alien vessel was barely holding together, and one wrong move could destroy both ships. It took Chief Engineer Choi Yun-soo and her team 6 nerve-wracking hours to carefully connect the airlocks. Every few minutes, they heard groaning sounds from the alien ship's hull, like it was crying out in pain. Finally, the green light appeared on the airlock panel. The connection was secure. Captain Tae-ho stood in front of the sealed door, his heart pounding. Behind him, Dr. Lee Min-woo checked his medical equipment one last time. The rest of the crew waited in the corridor, boxes of food and medical supplies stacked high around them. "Remember," Tae-ho said quietly, "we don't know their customs or culture. We move slowly, speak softly, and show them we're here to help." The airlock door slid open with a soft hiss. The smell hit them first, a strange sweet scent mixed with something that reminded Tae-ho of old flowers. The air was thin and cold. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls of the alien corridor. Then they saw her. The alien stood in the doorway like a ghost. She was tall, much taller than any human, with 4 thin arms and skin that looked almost see-through. But what shocked the humans most was how sick she looked. Dark veins showed through her pale skin like a roadmap of suffering. Her large eyes were sunken deep in her skull, and she swayed on her feet like she might collapse at any moment. She wore what might have once been a uniform, but it hung on her thin frame like clothes on a scarecrow. When she tried to speak, her voice was so weak they could barely hear it. I am Commander Thexara," she whispered in her own language. The translation device on her chest crackled to life a moment later, with the mechanical English words. "We are 3,000. We have nothing left." The simple words hit the humans like a punch to the gut. Here was a being who had probably once been strong and proud, now reduced to begging strangers for help. Tae-ho felt tears sting his eyes, but he forced himself to stay calm. He stepped forward slowly and gently, took one of her thin hands in both of his. Her skin was cold and felt as fragile as paper. "I am Tae-ho," he said clearly, knowing his own translation device would convert his words. "We have food, we have medical supplies, we have hope." For a moment, Commander Thexara just stared at him. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees. Dr. Lee Min-woo rushed forward to help her, but she waved him away with one shaking hand. You came," she whispered, and the humans could hear the wonder in her voice even through the mechanical translation. "You actually came." Behind her, more aliens appeared in the corridor. All of them looked just as sick and starved as their commander. Some were so weak they had to lean against the walls to stand, but in their large, dark eyes, the humans could see something that hadn't been there before. Hope. The moment Captain Tae-ho saw the condition of the Veltari, he knew they were racing against time. Dr. Lee Min-woo quickly scanned several of the aliens with his medical equipment, and the results were terrifying. Their bodies were shutting down from starvation. Some of them had maybe days left to live. "We need to get food into them immediately," Dr. Lee whispered to the captain. "But we have to be careful. The wrong nutrients could kill them faster than the starvation." Back on the Harmony, the entire human crew sprang into action like they were fighting a fire. Engineer Yoon So-young, a brilliant woman who could fix anything with wires and circuits, worked frantically on the food processors. The problem was huge. Human food might be poisonous to the Veltari, but they had to try something. "Captain," she called out, sweat beading on her forehead as she rewired the machine. "I can modify our processors to break down the proteins differently. It won't be perfect, but it might keep them alive." In the ship's kitchen, Chef Kang Byung-ho was performing his own kind of miracle. He had been cooking for space crews for 15 years, but this was the biggest challenge of his life. Using Dr. Lee's scans of Veltari biology, he worked to create a nutritious soup that their alien digestive systems could handle. "I'm using our emergency protein packs," he explained to anyone who would listen, stirring a large pot with intense concentration, adding synthetic vitamins, breaking down the fats into simpler compounds. "It's not going to taste like much, but it should keep them alive." The smell of the cooking soup filled the Harmony, It smelled strange. Not quite human food, but not unpleasant either. Every crew member who passed the kitchen stopped to look. They all knew what this meant. Every ingredient going into that pot was coming from their own supplies. They were literally giving away their own survival to save strangers. Nobody complained. Nobody even hesitated. Petty Officer Park Ji-hoon, barely 22 years old, volunteered to carry the first batch over to the alien ship. His hands were shaking as he lifted the large container of soup, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He was about to feed the first meal to beings from another world. The scene on the Veltari ship was heartbreaking. Families huddled together in the corridors, too weak to move to proper quarters. Children lay in their parents' arms, their breathing shallow and weak. The adults tried to comfort each other, but everyone could see the despair in their large, dark eyes. When the humans arrived with the first containers of soup, word spread through the ship like electricity. Veltari, who could barely walk, began helping to distribute the warm meal to those who couldn't move at all. Elder Nix Illa was brought to the front of the line. She was ancient even by Veltari standards, her translucent skin almost glowing with age. Her forearms trembled as helpers guided her to a sitting position. She had been a teacher on their homeworld, someone who had spent her life caring for others. Now she was so weak she could barely lift her head. A young human medic, Corporal Kim Se-jin, knelt beside the elder and offered her a cup of the warm soup. The old Veltari looked at the human with confusion. Through her translation device, she asked, Why are you giving this to me first? I am old. Give it to the children." Kim Se-jin smiled gently. "We have enough for everyone. You first, then the children, then everyone else. Nobody gets left behind." With shaking hands, Elder Nixilla lifted the cup to her lips and took her first sip of food in 4 days. The warm, nourishing liquid hit her empty stomach, and something incredible happened. She began to cry. Clear tears streamed down her face as the reality hit her. These strangers, these humans she had never met, were feeding her with their own food. They were sharing their supplies, not asking for anything in return, not demanding payment or promises. They were just helping because it was the right thing to do. The sight of the respected elder crying touched every Veltari who saw it. Soon others were crying too, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude and relief. Parents wept as they watched their children take their first sips of soup. Warriors who had thought they would die in space suddenly dared to hope they might see another sunrise. The news spread through the massive ship like wildfire. The humans were sharing everything they had, these small, strange beings from a world. Cold Earth had risked their own lives to save people they didn't even know. As the night went on, human crew members worked tirelessly, carrying container after container of soup through the alien corridors. They helped feed Veltari, who were too weak to hold cups, comforted crying children, and sat with families who had thought this would be their last day alive. The miracle wasn't just the food, it was the kindness of strangers willing to risk everything for others. As the warm soup spread through the Veltari ship, something magical began to happen. The change started small. A child who had been lying motionless for days suddenly opened her eyes and smiled at her mother. An elderly Veltari, who everyone thought was dying, sat up and asked for more food. Parents who had been whispering final goodbyes to their children instead began talking about what they would do tomorrow. The corridors that had been filled with the silence of despair suddenly buzzed with quiet conversations. Veltari families huddled together, not to say farewell, but to share hope. Children who had forgotten how to laugh began making small sounds of joy when they tasted the strange but wonderful human soup. Commander Thexara walked through her ship with tears in her eyes, but for the first time in months, they were tears of relief. Everywhere she looked, she saw her people coming back to life. The humans had brought more than food. They had brought the gift of a future. Back on the Harmony, Lieutenant Park Hye-jin sat at her communication station with a heavy responsibility on her shoulders. Captain Tae-ho had given her a simple but enormous task: contact Earth and tell them what was happening. Her fingers trembled as she composed the message. "How do you explain that you've just made first contact with alien life? How do you tell your superiors that 3,000 beings are dying in space and need immediate help? She took a deep breath and began typing. Earth Command, this is Lieutenant Park Hee-jin aboard the survey vessel Harmony. We have encountered alien refugees in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. 3,000 individuals, starving, ship failing. We are sharing our supplies but need immediate support. This is not a drill. First contact situation, please advise. She sent the message and waited. Space communication took time. The signal had to travel incredible distances to reach Earth. But she knew that in a few hours, someone would receive the most important message in human history. Captain Tae-ho found her staring at the communication panel hours later. Any response yet? He asked. Sir, you need to see this, she said, her voice filled with wonder. She turned her screen toward him, and his jaw dropped. The response wasn't just from Earth Command. It was from everywhere. The first message came from Admiral Chen Ho-seok at Earth Command. Humanitarian mission approved. Mobilizing all available resources. You've done humanity proud. But that was just the beginning. Within hours, messages were pouring in from across human space. The cargo ship New Seoul, carrying supplies to the outer colonies, had changed course and was racing toward their position. Captain Lee Hana reported that her crew had volunteered to give up their own cargo to help the aliens. From the mining colony on Kepler 442b came another message. This is Colony Director Park Sang-woo. We're loading every supply ship we have with food and medical equipment. ETA 72 hours. The research station orbiting Proxima Centauri sent word that their entire staff was preparing care packages. Even the military got involved. Admiral Kim Jong-soo announced that the 7th Supply Fleet, originally headed to resupply human colonies, was being diverted to help the Veltari. Sir, Lieutenant Park said, her voice barely above a whisper. Look at this. She showed him a message from a small trading vessel called the Busan Merchant. The captain, an old trader named Yu Seung-ho, had written, Have 3 months of emergency rations aboard, not much, but it's yours. Every human ship in this sector is coming to help. We don't abandon people in need. Captain Tae-ho felt his throat tighten with emotion. This wasn't just about following orders or military duty. Ordinary humans, traders, miners, colonists, researchers, were dropping everything to help beings they had never met. The messages kept coming. Volunteer doctors from the medical station at Wolf 359 were preparing to travel to provide aid. Engineers from the shipyard at Tau Ceti were designing emergency repairs for the Veltari vessel. Even civilians on Earth were organizing supply drives, preparing care packages to send on the next available ships. Sir, Park said, scrolling through message after message, I count at least 47 ships that have changed course to come help us. 47. And more are joining every hour. What amazed Tae-ho most was that nobody asked questions about the cost or the risk. Nobody demanded to know what humans would get in return for helping. They just heard that people were suffering and immediately decided to help. A message came in from his own sister, who worked at the Space Traffic Control Center on Earth. Oppa, the whole world is watching. Everyone is so proud of you and your crew. Dad says to tell you that you're representing the best of humanity out there. As Captain Tae-ho looked around his ship, he realized they had started something incredible. What began as one small survey ship trying to help some strangers in distress had become the largest humanitarian mission in human history. The Veltari weren't alone anymore, and neither were the humans of the Harmony. They were all part of something bigger now, a galaxy where kindness could spread faster than the speed of light. As the days passed and the Veltari grew stronger from the human-provided food, something beautiful began happening between the two species. What started as a desperate rescue mission slowly transformed into the most fascinating cultural exchange in galactic history. It began with simple curiosity. Veltari children, now healthy enough to walk around, would peek shyly at the human crew members working on their ship. The humans, equally curious, would smile and wave back. Language barriers meant nothing to children. They communicated through gestures, drawings on the walls, and shared laughter. Security Chief Bai Yun-seo was the first human to really connect with the young Veltari. She was a tough woman who had served in the Earth Defense Force for 12 years, but when she saw alien children still weak from hunger, Her heart melted completely. "Look at this," she said to Captain Tejo, kneeling beside a group of small Veltari who were watching her with huge, curious eyes. She pulled out a simple string from her pocket and began making cat's cradle patterns with her fingers. The children gasped in delight and began trying to copy her movements with their forearms. Within hours, human games were spreading through the Veltari ship like wildfire. The children learned to play rock, paper, scissors, though they had to modify it since they had 4 hands instead of 2. They taught the humans their own games, complex puzzles that required using all 4 arms simultaneously, and singing games that created beautiful harmonies. But the real revelations came when the adults began talking. Dr. Lee Minwoo spent hours with the Veltari healers comparing medical knowledge. What he discovered amazed him. "Captain," he reported after one long session, "their understanding of medicine is incredible. They've been practicing healing arts for thousands of years. But they're fascinated by our approach. They've never seen anything like our medical scanners or synthetic medicines." The cultural exchange went both ways. Commander Thexara, now strong enough to walk without assistance, shared her people's history with Captain Tejo. What she told him changed everything he thought he knew about the Veltari. "We were not always refugees," she explained, her voice carrying the weight of lost glory. "Once the Veltari Empire controlled 12 star systems. We were warriors, conquerors. Our armies were feared across this entire sector of the galaxy." She showed him holographic records of their ancient civilization, massive battle fleets, conquered worlds, proud Veltari generals standing over defeated enemies. For over 1,000 years, they had been one of the most powerful military forces in known space. "We took what we wanted," Thexara continued, shame evident in her voice. "We believed that strength meant the ability to defeat others, to take their resources, to expand our territory. We were proud of our power." Captain Tejo listened in fascination. These thin, graceful beings had once been galactic conquerors? It seemed impossible to believe looking at them now, but then Thexara asked him a question that stopped him cold. "Tell me about human military history," she said. "Your species must be incredibly powerful warriors to have survived in this dangerous galaxy. How many worlds have you conquered? How large is your empire?" Tejo felt embarrassed as he explained the truth. We don't really have an empire. Humans control maybe a dozen worlds, mostly colonies and research stations. In terms of military power, we're actually considered pretty weak by galactic standards." The Veltari stared at him in confusion. Elder Nixilla, who had been listening to the conversation, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "If humans are weak, why did you risk everything to save us? Strong species take from the weak. They don't give away their own resources." It was Dr. Lee Minwoo who answered, and his words would be remembered by the Veltari for generations to come. "Maybe we're physically weak," he said quietly, "but we believe that real strength isn't about conquering others. Real strength is about helping others, even when it costs you something. Real strength is choosing to be kind when you could choose to be cruel." The silence that followed was profound. The Veltari had spent 1,000 years believing that power meant domination. They had conquered worlds and called it strength. But when their own world was destroyed and they faced extinction, it wasn't warriors who saved them. It was the weak, humans who had given them everything. Young Veltari, who had grown up hearing stories of their ancestors' military victories, began asking different questions. Instead of wanting to hear about battles won, they asked about the humans' decision to help strangers. Instead of dreaming of conquest, they started talking about exploration and discovery. The cultural exchange was changing both species. Humans learned about advanced Veltari arts, sciences and philosophy. But more importantly, the Veltari were learning a completely new definition of what it meant to be strong. As Security Chief Bay watched Veltari children playing human games, sharing toys and helping each other, she realized something profound was happening. These children would grow up in a galaxy where kindness was valued over conquest, where helping others was seen as the ultimate strength. The rescue had saved more than lives. It had planted the seeds of a completely new way of thinking about power. The morning of the 6th day started like any other aboard the Harmony, but everything changed when Lieutenant Park Hee-jin's communication panel suddenly came alive with Dozens of incoming signals. She stared at her screen in amazement as ship after ship appeared on their long-range sensors, all heading directly toward them. "Captain," she called out, her voice filled with excitement and disbelief. "You need to see this. They're here, all of them." Captain Tejo rushed to the bridge, and what he saw through the main view screen took his breath away. The empty space around them was no longer empty. Ships were arriving from every direction, massive cargo vessels, sleek medical ships, military transports, and even small private traders. It looked like someone had called together the largest fleet in human history. The first to arrive was the Soul's Pride, a massive cargo hauler that normally carried supplies to the outer colonies. Captain Jung Da-hoon's voice crackled over the communication system, warm and friendly despite the formal situation. "Harmony, this is Captain Jung Da-hoon of the Soul's Pride. We're here to help our new friends. I've got enough food aboard to feed an army for 6 months. Where do you want us to start?" Behind the Soul's Pride came ship after ship. The medical vessel Healing Hand carried doctors and nurses from 3 different human colonies. The construction, Shipbuilder's Dream, was loaded with repair equipment and materials to fix the Veltari vessel. Private traders like the Lucky Star and Distant Hope had donated their entire cargo holds to the rescue effort. But the most impressive sight was the arrival of Admiral Han Mi-young's command ship, the Unified Spirit. The Admiral was a legend in human space, a woman who had started as a simple engineer and worked her way up to become one of the most respected leaders in the Earth Defense Force. She was known for her wisdom, her fairness, and her absolute dedication to protecting human interests. The fact that she had come personally meant this rescue operation was now the most important thing happening in human space. As the fleet organized itself around the damaged Veltari ship, Captain Tejo couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. When he had first received that distress call, he had been just one captain trying to do the right thing. Now, he was at the center of the largest humanitarian mission in human history. "Sir," Lieutenant Park reported, "Admiral Han is requesting permission to board the Veltari vessel. She wants to meet with their leadership personally." Within the hour, Admiral Han Mi-young was walking through the corridors of the alien ship, surrounded by her staff, but moving with the calm confidence of someone who had seen everything the galaxy could throw at her. She was a small woman in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes, but she carried herself with the authority of someone used to making decisions that affected millions of lives. The Veltari who saw her were amazed. They had expected human leaders to be large and intimidating, like their own ancient warriors had been. Instead, here was this small, gentle-looking woman who commanded the respect of an entire fleet, Elder Nix Illa. Now much stronger thanks to days of human food and medical care, was chosen to represent the Veltari in this historic meeting. As the oldest and wisest of the survivors, she carried the hopes and fears of her entire species. The meeting took place in what had once been the Veltari ship's grand conference room. The walls were cracked, and some of the elegant decorations had been damaged, but it was still an impressive space that spoke of the Veltari's once great civilization. Admiral Han entered the room with only a small group of advisors, deliberately keeping the meeting intimate rather than overwhelming. She approached Elder Nix Illa with the same respect she would show to any world leader, bowing slightly in greeting. "Elder Nix Illa," she said, her words being translated by the now familiar devices, "I am Admiral Han Mi-young, representing the United Earth Defense Force and the human colonies. We have come to help." The old Veltari studied the human admiral carefully. In her long life she had met many powerful beings, but there was something different about this small human woman. There was no arrogance, no sense of superiority, just genuine concern and determination to help. "Admiral," Nix Illa replied, "we are grateful beyond words for what your people have already done. But we must ask, what do you want in exchange? In our experience, no one gives without expecting something in return." Admiral Han smiled, and her next words would be remembered by both species for generations to come. "We offer you sanctuary," she said simply, her voice clear and strong. "A new world where your people can rebuild and prosper. Good farming land, clean water, safe skies. We ask for no tribute, no service, no payment. The only thing we require is that you live and prosper, and remember that kindness exists in this galaxy." Elder Nixilla felt her legs give way, and she sank to her knees. Not from weakness this time, but from overwhelming emotion. Around the room, other Veltari were crying openly. After months of despair, after watching their civilization die, they were being offered not just survival, but a real future. How? How is this possible? Nixilla whispered. Why would you do this for strangers? Admiral Han knelt down beside the elder, meeting her at eye level. Because, she said softly, that's what good neighbors do. 3 months had passed since that first desperate rescue, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The dying refugee ship Kalen's Hope had been completely rebuilt by human engineers and renamed New Kalen, a symbol of the fresh start awaiting the Veltari people. The ship that had once been held together by emergency patches and prayers now gleamed with new hull plating and state-of-the-art life support systems. But the real transformation was in the Veltari themselves. The hollow-eyed, starving beings who had once barely been able to stand were now healthy, hopeful and ready to start over. Children who had forgotten how to play were now running through the corridors, their laughter echoing off the walls. Adults who had given up on tomorrow were making plans for their new lives. Captain Tai Ho had stayed with the Veltari throughout the entire journey to their new home. The Harmony had been refitted as an escort vessel, and he had volunteered to see the mission through to its end. Over the past 3 months, he had watched friendships bloom between his crew and the alien refugees. What had started as a rescue mission had become something much deeper, a bond between 2 species that would last forever. The destination was a world the humans had discovered only 2 years earlier. It was a beautiful planet, with purple-tinted oceans and 3 small moons, remarkably similar to the Veltari's lost homeworld. The human survey teams had named it Harmony Prime, but everyone agreed the Veltari should choose their own name for their new home. As the fleet of ships approached the planet, an excited buzz filled the New Kalen. Veltari families crowded around every viewport, pressing their faces against the transparent aluminum to get their first glimpse of the world that would become their new home. "Look at those continents," whispered Commander Thexara, standing beside Captain Teho on the bridge. "The land masses, they're shaped almost like the continents of our old world. It's like the universe is giving us a second chance. The planet below was breathtaking. Rolling green hills stretched to the horizon, broken by silver rivers and crystal-clear lakes. The northern continent had mountain ranges that sparkled with snow, while the southern regions showed vast forests and grasslands, perfect for farming. The human survey teams had confirmed that the soil was fertile, the climate was mild, and there were no dangerous predators or diseases. But what moved the Veltari most was what they saw in orbit around the planet. Human construction ships were already there, having arrived weeks earlier to begin preparing landing sites and basic infrastructure. They had built temporary shelters, established water purification systems, and even started planting crops that would be ready for harvest by the time the Veltari were settled. "They did all this for us?" asked Elder Nixilla, her voice filled with wonder as she watched the activity below. Dr. Li Minwu, who had become close friends with many of the Veltari healers, smiled as he answered. "The human colonies voted on it. Every world contributed something: materials, equipment, volunteers. The farming colony at New Korea sent seeds and agricultural equipment. The mining stations donated construction materials. Even Earth itself sent a team of their best terraforming experts. As the New Kalen entered orbit, Captain Teho received a communication from the surface. The voice belonged to Colony Director Kim Woo-jin, who had volunteered to oversee the settlement preparation. "Welcome to your new home," Kim's voice said warmly. "We've prepared landing sites for your people and temporary housing for everyone. The soil analysis is complete. Perfect. For Veltari agriculture, we're ready to begin the landing sequence whenever you are." Commander Thexara took a deep breath and activated her own communication system. This would be the first time a Veltari had spoken to humans from the surface of what would become their new world. "Director Kim," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. This is Commander Thexara of the Veltari people. We don't have words to express our gratitude. You have given us more than a new world. You have given us hope." Below them, the morning sun was rising over the planet's largest continent, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Rivers sparkled like jewels, and vast forests swayed in gentle breezes. It was the most beautiful sight any of the Veltari had seen since fleeing their destroyed homeworld. "Your people saved us," Thexara said quietly to Captain Teho, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just our bodies, but our souls. We had forgotten what it meant to hope, to dream of tomorrow. You reminded us." Captain Teho watched as the first shuttles began their descent to the planet's surface. Each shuttle carried Veltari families, eager to set foot on solid ground for the first time in months. Human and Veltari engineers worked side by side in the shuttle bays, making final preparations for the historic landing. "Look at them," he said, gesturing to where human and Veltari children were playing together near one of the viewports. 6 months ago, our species had never met. Now look at them. They're friends, partners, family. As the first shuttle touched down on the surface of Harmony Prime, cheers erupted throughout the ship. The Veltari were home. 1 year had passed since the first Veltari shuttle touched down on the surface of what they now called New Kalan Prime, and the transformation was beyond anything anyone had imagined. What had started as a desperate refugee camp had grown into a thriving city that sparkled in the light of the planet's 3 moons. The streets bustled with activity as Veltari families went about their daily lives. Children played in parks where both earth flowers and Veltari crystal plants grew side by side. Markets sold goods from both worlds, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter, conversation, and construction as the city continued to expand. But the most remarkable thing about New Kalan wasn't the buildings or the technology, it was the people. The Veltari, who had once been a proud warrior race focused on conquest, had become something entirely different. They were teachers, farmers, artists, and healers. They had learned to build instead of destroy, to create instead of conquer. Elder. Nixilla stood in the center of the city's main square, looking up at the monument that would soon be unveiled. It was a beautiful piece of art that combined human and Veltari design elements. A tall spire that seemed to reach toward the stars, surrounded by flowing sculptures that represented the journey from despair to hope. Around her, thousands of beings had gathered for the ceremony. Veltari families stood next to human visitors who had come from across the galaxy to witness this historic moment. Captain Teho was there, of course, along with many of the crew from the Harmony. Admiral Han Mi-young had made the long journey from Earth specifically for this dedication. Even some of the human colonists who had donated supplies and resources were present, wanting to see how their generosity had grown into something beautiful. But the crowd wasn't just humans and Veltari. Word of the rescue had spread throughout the galaxy, and representatives from dozens of different species had come to learn about what they were calling the human way. There were tall blue-skinned Zephyrians from the outer rim, crystalline beings from the silicon worlds, and even some of the mysterious energy creatures from the nebula systems. As Elder Nixilla approached the speaking platform, she felt the weight of history on her shoulders. This wasn't just a dedication ceremony. It was a moment that would define how the galaxy thought about strength, kindness, and the responsibility beings had toward each other. Her voice carried clearly through the translation devices as she began to speak, her words being broadcast live to millions of beings across hundreds of worlds. "My friends," she began, her voice strong despite her advanced age. "1 year ago today, the first Veltari children set foot on the soil of this world. They were children who had known only hunger, fear, and the cold darkness of space. Today, those same children go to school, play with friends, and dream of becoming scientists, artists, and explorers." She paused, looking out at the crowd, her eyes finding Captain Teho in the front row. "The humans found us dying in the void," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We were strangers to them, alien, unknown, possibly dangerous. They had no reason to help us except for one simple fact. We needed help and they were able to give it." A murmur went through the crowd as beings from dozens of different worlds considered those words. In a galaxy where most species dealt with each other through trade agreements, military treaties, and careful negotiations, the idea of helping strangers without expecting anything in return was revolutionary. They asked for nothing, Elder Nixilla said, her voice now carrying to every corner of the square. They gave everything. Their food became our food. Their medicine became our medicine. Their hope became our hope. And when we asked why, their answer was simple. Because it was the right thing to do. She turned toward the covered monument, and with a gesture the covering fell away to reveal the inscription carved in both human and Veltari script. To the humans who gave us tomorrow, may your kindness echo through the stars for all time. But, as beautiful as the monument was, Elder Nixilla wasn't finished with her speech. She had something more important to say. Today we dedicate this monument not just to remember what the humans did for us, but to promise what we will do for others. We have learned that true strength lies not in the ability to conquer, but in the courage to help. Not in taking from others, but in giving to others. She raised her forearms toward the sky, and her voice rang out like a bell. Let this be our pledge to the galaxy. Any being who comes to us in need will find the same kindness that the humans showed us. Any species that faces extinction will find sanctuary. Any children who cry in the darkness will find light. The crowd erupted in cheers that could be heard for miles. But more importantly, the message was being heard across the galaxy. On hundreds of worlds, beings were listening to Elder Nixilla's words and thinking about what they meant. The legend of human compassion was spreading, and with it a new way of thinking about what it meant to be truly strong.